So welcome to the Blackboard Innovative Teaching Series. I'm very excited for today's session. We will be holding our first ever BITS office hours, and today's session will focus on course design. This idea actually came from one of our clients after our spring program. So we do read all of the surveys we send out and all of your comments. We have a variety of speakers on today's call. We have a mix of internal product experts and also a few clients joining us to help answer your questions. Here's a look at some of our upcoming webinars over the next month. Just a reminder, we will be going through mid-December 2013, and you can register for all webinars on blackboard.com/bits. All webinars are recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube. We will also send out a recap email, most likely within 24 hours of your webinar, with a link to the YouTube video. So today's session is our BITS office hours. How does it work? Our first 30 minutes will be devoted to our internal product experts answering your frequently asked questions. So questions that are common about course design, you'll hear the answers explained. The second 30 minutes will be an open forum, and you can ask your questions. Feel free to ask your questions at any point during the session, and I will gather them, and we will open it up for that second half. And we also will have chat support answering your questions along the way. But as soon as a question sparks you, feel free to type it into the chat. We'll try to get through as many questions as possible in the open forum, and if we have any remaining, we will try to follow up after the session. Now we have 5 speakers joining us today. The 3 internal speakers you'll hear from Connie Weber, who is a senior manager with our Blackboard consulting team. You'll hear from Cheryl Cyrus, who's a senior consultant with our Blackboard consulting team, and Misty Cobb, who is a solutions engineer for Blackboard. And if you've joined any of our BITS sessions before, you've probably seen these 3 ladies helping answer your questions. We also have 2 very special clients joining us today. We have Paige Brooks-Jeffiers, who's the Director for Innovative Strategies at Kentucky Community and Technical College System. We also have Brian Morgan, who's a Chair and Associate Professor at Marshall University. Now both Paige and Brian are big client leaders in our community. They both are Ask the Doctors, which is a client-led forum for Q&A. And Paige also has won an Exemplary Course Program Award. So we have a great panel of 5 speakers today who are going to be here to walk you through course design questions and experts on the topic. So without further ado, we're going to kick off our first segment, the formalized explaining of the common questions for course design. And we're going to kick it off with Connie Weber, who's going to explain her first question. So if I could just have, when we do have our speakers, so Connie and Cheryl, if you would like to first dictate the question and then walk through your answer.
I'll be glad to do that. Hello everyone, it's Connie Weber. So one of the first questions that I'm often asked is, how can I get started designing a course? So that's really a very fundamental question. And of course the basic answer to that is to begin with planning. So if you will, let me go ahead and move forward. So as you begin to think about planning, I always recommend that before you even touch Blackboard, to begin with a piece of paper in terms of planning. And many of you probably have some experience with instructional design, or you even have just some internal knowledge of what do I want to do with my course, even if you have not studied instructional design. But instructional design practices or design models can be helpful to you, and there are a number of them out there. A very basic one that you may have heard of is the ADDIE model. And the ADDIE model is basically analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. And I have a link there for you, and we'll be sharing a copy of this presentation. But if you Google ADDIE, you will find lots of different interpretations of this particular model and a number of ways in which you can apply this in online learning. And there's even some new more innovative applications of it for online learning. But the way that I use this personally in application is thinking about, first of all, analyzing who are you going to be using this with. So that's your analysis. And what kind of resources do you have to put into your course, whether it be an online course or a hybrid course? And thinking about your goals for this particular course that you're going to be working with. And then start thinking about your instructional goals and writing down what those goals are. Select whatever methods and tools that you're going to use within your course. What are the tools that you're most comfortable with? Are you going to use Blackboard Collaborate? Are you going to have mostly an asynchronous course? What are the methodologies and the ways that you're going to structure that course? And then as you begin to develop that course, how can you repurpose some of the existing content that you already have? Will you be taking content and migrating it from another platform? Will you be moving from an older version of a course and bringing it in? So these are all questions that you have to take into account. And then as you actually go and teach the course, that's your implementation phase. And clearly, as you actually go and implement, you're going to find that some things work and some things clearly do not work. And that leads you to some evaluation where you say, you know, that worked, that did not work, and it actually leads you into a cycle that you move forward once again. And so I always leave myself a little bit of wiggle room where I say, this was my first version of this course. You know, I don't have to have the course perfect in my first round of it. This was my first semester of teaching this course. You know, next semester I'm going to make it even better. Now another approach that you can use is one by a designer named Robert Gagne. And Robert Gagne actually began designing back in the 1960s. And he was one of the forerunners, believe it or not, of some of the instructional design used by the military. But I think that some of his design has been especially helpful for me in introducing faculty into thinking about how you can structure content into Blackboard because he suggests here that you can put your content in by, first of all, gaining attention. And I think about that in terms of perhaps I can put in an image, perhaps I can put in a leading question, perhaps I can put in something that will get a student's interest before I actually start putting in my content. And then you inform the learners of your objectives. And then stimulating some recall of prior learning. How does this connect to something they already know about? So you may be, I'm sure you have never seen this, but I have seen it many times where we go into lesson 1 and the only thing there is a link to a PowerPoint presentation. Well, Gagne helps us to go beyond that. It helps us say, what can we do besides just putting a simple link to a PowerPoint presentation? Let's expand beyond that by, first of all, getting the students' interest, helping them understand what is it that they'll be able to do after they go through this lesson. How does this connect to what they already knew before? Then we're going to present whatever stimulus we have, and then provide them some learning guidance to actually be able to do, give them some guidance to actually be able to learn to do whatever they should be able to do at the end of this lesson. And then give them some practice to actually be able to do that. So that might be some kind of practice evaluation, whether it be a test, whether it be an activity, and then provide them some kind of feedback. And then some assessment of that. And then I always like to have some kind of something to help them enhance their retention or transfer it to some other context. How does this apply to their real life? So this is just an example of a way to kind of stretch beyond just simply providing a PowerPoint presentation for a lesson. So these are one example of how you might be able to get started in the course design process. The second question that I often get asked is, they've heard something about a template. Now, what is a template and why might I want to use it? Well, I'm a very big proponent of templates, and I love to talk about templates. But basically a template is a standardized course that serves as a model for best practice in online learning. So we might think about a couple of considerations as we get started thinking about this standardized course. First of all, these courses can be used in probably 3 different ways. Templates can, first of all, be used at the institution level, where an entire institution might have a template where everybody at the institution uses a standardized course so that everyone uses kind of the same menu, and there might be some standardized content that is put into all of the courses. Or you might have one department or school that uses a standardized template. Or you just yourself have your own template that you use for all of your courses. So let me ask now, how many of you at your institution currently use a template? Can I get a green check mark for any of you that currently have templates being used? Oh, I have several happening. We've got 9, 10. See, so far we have perhaps about almost a third of you are currently using templates at your institution. So this is not something entirely new. And for some of you, I see a few check marks of absolutely no, and I'm kind of guessing the others are not quite sure what I'm talking about yet. So I'll go a little bit further in talking about what is this. So in terms of benefits, there's kind of benefits for all 3 levels of using templates. From an institutional level, if we were to use a template for the institution where everyone is using the same template, it really is very helpful in terms of large-scale professional development. If we had the same course shell, so to speak, then it makes it very easy to train other faculty to get started using Blackboard, because it makes it very clear where do we put our content, how do we set up our menu. It makes it just a little bit easier for people to get started with Blackboard. It also makes it much easier to help with part-time faculty or adjunct faculty, because maybe they come in without a whole lot of training, and they would be able to know how to use Blackboard a little bit easier. And also it can help with large-scale implementation of best practices. And of course it can help with overall program quality. Sometimes if there's not a standardized template, you may have some inconsistencies where in some cases some faculty may not, for example, clear out their menu and have like some tools on their menu that they're not actually using. So being able to have the menu kind of streamlined and set up in a consistent manner so that students know where they're going to find things can sometimes be very helpful. For the instructor using a template, it really saves them time and effort and provides some useful targets. This is how I'm going to put my content in, and it saves them time in editing. And of course for the student, they don't have any anxiety of disorientation. They know where they're going to find things. And of course this unified learning experience. So those are just a few ideas about using templates. And now I'm going to move on and let my colleague talk a little bit about if we had a template that might have a consistent menu, for example, what are some ways in which we might be able to be organizing a course? And I'm going to go on to Cheryl and have her talk a little bit about ways that a menu might be able to be organized.
Great. Thank you, Connie, and good morning, everyone. So to segue from what Connie was referencing within the template, which of course, as we both agree, definitely a best practice, some of the questions that we do get in that storyboarding stage are, well, what are the different ways to organize the course menu? So by default, there are default menus that come with the system, as I know that most of you already know, as you get a course shell opening up in Blackboard. But of course, it's meant there for you to be able to customize that. So commonly, when you start thinking about how you want to customize that, one of the first ideas, again, to Connie's point, is whether or not the instructor would have total anonymity to allow themselves to be able to customize the course menu, or whether you will go with the template feature, or perhaps a combination of both. So when you think about some of those ideas, you might want to think about whether or not what would be the most advantageous default menu based on if the instructor was going to be able to customize that. So by default, you only need to have one link in the course shell. So if the instructor was responsible for completely pushing out a course menu, it might be easier for that person instead of taking off what they don't want and then adding what they do. Additionally, you probably also know that in our quick styles, you can actually adopt many of the templates that have been provided to you based on a lot of research and best practices. So that's another excellent way for the instructor, if they do have that ability to make those customizations, that they can actually easily put in that course menu and adopt either the style or, again, to create it themselves. So another idea may be that a course menu be designed by topic. So again, depending on whether or not you're going with the template, whether it's disciplinary or even if it's one for the entire institution, it would depend a lot on whether or not you're going to have a more holistic course menu as opposed to more specific, as being divided by topic and in this image by unit as well. So you'll notice that by topic, a lot of times we think of topics in the sense of concept. So this is a great way, depending on the type of course. Again, there's usually a dichotomy between, like if it's a lab type course or a clinical atmosphere, as opposed to even totally online, maybe more of an arts and science. Also, we need to look and appreciate whether or not we're designing this course menu for a web-enhanced course or a blended course or an online course. Strategically, there is a difference between them. Functionally, of course, there's not. But you always want to take the place of the user so that when the user is entering the course shell, what is the user's purpose? In an online environment, obviously, to the success of the student, it is part of the requirement to enter that course on X amount of times or days to fulfill the requirement. If it's a blended, it may be some blended are combined with so much seat time as opposed to so much online time. Additionally, you might have some hybrid. I know originally when hybrids and blended were initially thought of, a lot of the reasons were real estate. And so consequently, if this were a 9-week course, 4.5 of it would be seat time, and then the other 4.5 may be out in clinical. So there would also be a dichotomy between that course menu, between how I'm entering and using the different sections. So lastly, with the web enhanced, that's usually more conceptual because the user is entering usually upon self-direction. They either want to reread, they want to gain the content that was provided, or they want to access different resources, none of which would in theory be mandated. There's usually a little bit of a difference in the strategic reasoning of why someone is entering the course. So that usually does lend itself nicely with the design and how you might want to think about that. The biggest thing is to remember that you want to ensure, an orderly fashion. So you definitely, if you're going conceptual or topic, you want to keep to that as opposed to the units. Now I say units in the sense that units can also be divided, chapters, any type of segmenting So it's usually recommended that if you are using a heavily used course with a text, that you want to appreciate, if not replicate, the segmenting of that text within your course shell. It allows the user more continuity within the environment. It also allows them to understand the alignment of how the course is segmented as well as the text. Again, one should go hand in hand if the course is heavily laden with text materials. If not, you want to be very careful that if you do go concept and still using a text, that you keep the nomenclature cohesive so that the learner understands and can appreciate that when you are referencing something within a unit or a chapter, that again, that cohesion is matching the text. So that's probably one of the bigger things that we definitely would see as a recommendation. So the other thing you might think about as you storyboard your course menu is what does the next level look like? So we spoke about, again, that course menu being dependent on A, the type of course, or B, the way of delivery. But also you want to appreciate in the storyboarding time is how are you going to organize that material once the learner clicks on that link. So again, if we think of our course menu somewhat in page design like an index, then as we click on that, the expectation of the learner is, and again, rhetorically, you want to try to second guess, why is the user clicking on that link, and what would be the expectation of that persona after they click on that. So this lends itself into what we would reference as level 2. And level 2 is most likely, if utilizing a content area in design, it would be your organization of those materials and the curriculum. So as most of you know, these are commonly contained in containers, if you will. So the infrastructure is usually organized in one or a combination of 3 ways. So the tools that are commonly used are actual folders, where you would design a system of folders and have your different items and curriculum in the folders. One of a great best practice is by numbering folders. It allows the learner to easily understand where they are at all times, and you continue that with breadcrumbs. So if the parent folder for example, it was conceptual, or it even had some type of chapter or unit on it, especially if it's a unit and there's a plethora of chapters under it, it's nice to have that numbering convention. So if the top folder, the parent folder, is a 1.0, and then if you have subfolders, each one of those would be 1.1, 1.2, and that it even delves down so far as to go into your items. So even those individual artifacts have a numbering convention. It does twofold. It helps the learner always stay on track to know where they are in a given folder, especially those of you that have a lot of information in curriculum. Sometimes those folders, I've seen them quite deep, so it allows the learner to stay with that cohesion and always know where they are. It also allows you for easy reference. So if the student has a question regarding something, instead of saying, well, I'm in the presentation in Unit 1, well, there may be quite a few different presentations. So again, by having this numbering convention, it's really nice that it allows the learner to actually make a statement as to where it is that they feel challenged, or there was a good statement, or they're referencing perhaps on the discussion board. If they're speaking to one another within the course, it's nice to be able to reference that artifact or that asset so that other learners are exactly seeing or can access what it is that they're referencing. The next way of organization, one of the most common in fact, is our learning module. Our learning module, to me, the analogy is somewhat, it's like a big notebook that the learner can turn pages. But what I like to do is actually combine learning modules with folders. I think it makes a good representation. Again, it's going to depend on the discipline of the course and also the materials that are being utilized. But having a learning module that matches either the concepts or the units, and then within that learning module having those folders, the folder could be representative of the different chapters. And then again, within those different chapters, you could have subfolders. So you start to see the hierarchy. Moreover, the learner is presented, if you do utilize the table of contents, the learner is presented with a nice hierarchy so they can actually delve down. And as long as you don't have sequential viewing, they can actually click at any reference point that they want to delve down to instead of going through folder to folder to folder. So it makes a nice presentation, and I think the learners usually receive it quite positively. The last organization tool we won't spend too much time with, but we have another tool that's called a lesson plan. Sometimes lesson plan is akin to what many people think is the analogy of a K-12 environment, but we actually have a lot of pro-ed clients that like the lesson plan tool, specifically for the reason that you can actually customize fields so that you can have subheaders and subsections that you can customize depending on what your environment is. It's also nice for professional development. Another way that I've seen it used nicely is the lesson plan was actually a capstone. So within the entire modality of the course, the learner might go through systematically, but then they had this capstone project that, again, the customized fields allowed the instructor to design it so that it was this cohesive project that when they enter it, they knew that they were ready to enter it, and you could even, have it based on adaptive release so that they don't even see it until that project would become due. And again, anything and everything that had to do with that project would be contained in that lesson plan. And of course, you can go ahead and still put in learning modules and folders in the lesson plan. For instance, I did have one client that had 3 different components to make up the succession of a professional development course. So they designed it in a lesson plan, and each learning module was one component of the entire program, so that when the learner opened it, they saw the lesson plan as being the course delivery, and then each learning module was a separate segment that made up the entire program. I thought that was a really nice use case. The other question that confronts us often is, what are the best practices for designing for student success? And of course, one that we're all near and dear to our heart is definitely retention and student success. So we want to make sure that as we start to design and storyboard, that we're also having some, if you will, a web type thinking process, so that as we're designing the logistics of the course, that we're also thinking intrinsically to some of these points. And that definitely is the course outcomes. The learner should understand what is the outcome after I successfully complete this course. And then it starts to delve down a little bit deeper to the curriculum alignment. So that's where we want to make sure that the user is cognitive of what alignment, what are the goals and the objectives that this piece of curriculum is equated to, so that especially as adult learners, we appreciate when we can find value in what we're doing. So it really comes off positively if there is some type of assignment, assessment, or any type of activity, if you provide the learner with that alignment to the goals and the objectives to show how this activity will correlate to their success in completing not only this unit, but also the course itself. It's also very nice to provide resource links, links that are not necessarily a requisite or a mandate, but just external. I think we can all agree, regardless of what course we were in, there was some that we really wanted to learn more about, and maybe others, we just went through the course systematically. So providing those resource links allows the learner to extend themselves. It kind of reminds me of when I was teaching school that we would always make sure we had enrichment activities. So this somewhat equates to me is that I would provide these links to the students that would want to expound further on their knowledge. And then policies set apart from the syllabus. This is growing in popularity. Policies are very important, and of course they're very dynamic. Some of those you have control of, some you don't. But from ADA policies to grading policies, netiquette policies, any of those should have those be referenced to in the syllabus, but also as a standalone and necessarily set apart by that. You can use like a blank page to put those policies on, but always remember you also want to attach a document in case that person wants to print it or have a tangible copy of that. Same thing with any, from IEPs, K-12 to any educational policies that a student may have for special accommodation. So any of those, again, nicely put within the course to make sure that they're set apart, they're easily accessible to the students, and moreover, they're a standalone document that could be printed if needed. So the next bullet has to do with rubrics, and I actually kind of want to drive this on home. This is near and dear to my heart. So rubrics for all gradable assignments, I'll even expand on that to say that I believe rubrics should be used almost everywhere and anywhere where possible if it's a requirement of the student or an expectation, including even group activities. I want to know what is it that my expectations are as a group member, so that if I am receiving a group grade of participation, that's important to me as well. One thing I want to drive home, because I just recently had this experience where they said, well, I do have rubrics and I apply it to the assignment and I use it to grade with. And I said, well, when was it presented to the student? Oh, I don't present it. They get their grade with it. And so I think that it's pretty much recognized. I'll just drive that home again, that rubrics, should be transparent to the student from the time that the activity, the assessment, or assignment is provided to them. It's very important that the student understands the expectation of what it is from the instructor. So I know that when you use our rubrics within the system, you do have the privy to either have it available to the students or not. I wish that we could just make it that all rubrics were always available to all students when they're put in, but that is an option, and I would highly recommend that the student does receive the rubric prior to completing the assignment activity. And lastly, expectations. It is, I remember in pre-service teaching where they said never show the student, what it is that you made, because they'll always live in awe that, theirs didn't look like yours. I think that we can say that's a little bit different with our online. I think that it's a great experience for the student to have some type of project, like going back to that capstone project. It doesn't even have to be within the same discipline. If the expectations are similar. So I worked with an instructor recently that was building group activities with wikis. And so he built his own wiki for the course, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I thought that that was a great, because it actually showed an example with a non-example. The non-example was that it was not academic-centric. It was being pushed out by the instructor. But he also used all kinds of video, and he used the different pages, and everything about it just showed a very well pushed out, mature wiki. And so in theory, he provided the example to his students by setting that expectation. The other thing you want to make sure that you do is acquaint the students with the course tools prior to especially any type of grade requirement. So before you would ever have a gradable discussion board, blog, journal, or wiki assignment, no less an assessment, meaning taking an online assessment or test within the course, you always want to make sure that you provide that in a non-evaluative way. So a good way to do that is you can provide a discussion board that allows like a water cooler or an FAQ prior to the learner actually having to use it as a gradable assignment. The same thing with blogs. You can go ahead and, as an instructor, you can create your bio where it gets to, meet your instructor or something about your instructor. Go ahead and put it in a blog and ask them to comment. So right now, A, they've seen the blog, and B, they understand the commenting. And then again, it goes through like the journal activities, any type of clinical assignments. It's good to have those activities, again, in a non-evaluative way, always, always, before you expect the student to provide that understanding, utilizing the tool, and no less be a gradable assignment or assessment. And the last to that point is that you know that surveys and assessments riddle themselves in functionality as far as how the learner is experiencing it. So it's a great way to use a survey. I had an instructor recently that one of the first things the very first week was a survey about their expectations of the course, what their majors were, because it was an interdisciplinary course. And again, just gets the user acclimated to the tool before they ever see the first assessment. Okay, and then just real quickly, lastly, I know, Lauren, we're short on time. What are the best practices in designing the delivery of the content? So again, just very quickly, presented in learning units and modules. We spoke about that from the onset. Remember, step away from your course and look at the navigation, or have someone else look at your course and ask them and ask yourself, is the navigation really intuitive? It's intuitive to you because you designed it and you knew your methodology and why you were doing what you were doing. But when you take someone else outside of it, especially outside of the discipline, is it intuitive to that learner? Remember that it needs to flow in a logical progression. That's very hard as we take on different personas to step out of our comfort zone and say, is this truly logical? Again, keeping akin to a text, if using so, is a great way to mirror that. And use variety. You know, we spoke about from mashups to different, especially now with the video everywhere, there's so many different ways that we can present content that I really, if anything, I just kind of want to give a big shout out to those that are using just a multimodal way of accessing and presenting content and having students create content. And that goes without saying that content is always enhanced with any type of audio and visual effects. So when you think lastly inside your course information, this is a little bit segmented inside. Again, just to that last point that we were speaking of, when you look inside your course, is it done in a logical progression? Well, again, look inside and see. Are you making sure that you have mapped out all the different sections that the user needs to be successful in your course? And you also want to remember that as you start to design, you want to keep a cohesion. So you want it very systematic. You want it very almost that the user already expects what they're going to see when they flip the next page as far as the organization of the infrastructure of the course. So again, this is just a last screenshot of keeping, if you're going with a concept, you want to keep it in the learning module. You see how it says overview of week ahead. So this is great. Connie had touched on providing schema. You always want to tap back on what they're moving forward with is what they had learned previously. What are the learning objectives either for this unit or this module? And then start to go on. So if it's the bio and the external link, the assignment, etc., you see that that is organization. And so consequently, from the learner, I'm pointing my screen, but I know you don't see that right now. But the learner almost becomes in the learning module for each one. So if they were looking at each of these British poets, then each module would have been organized identical, if not similarly, so that the learner has that true expectation and they know exactly which way they want to go in to extract that information.
And we are ready to move on to part 2 of today's webinar, our open forum of the Q&A. So now it's your turn. You can ask your course design questions in the chat. Please remember to use the Q with a colon so we can more quickly ask the questions. There was a question that Matt had asked earlier that I wanted to expand on. Matt asked, do you find students, especially new Blackboard students, are confused or lost by subfolder and sub-subfolder structures? When do you apply the KISS method? And I know Paige had started answering that. So Paige, would you like to expand any more on that? And then we can ask if any of our other experts would like to chime in.
Hi, sure. Hi, everyone. This is Paige. I use folders, and I do have some nested folders. I haven't had students get lost. I use the tool link, the course tool link in Blackboard to put those links in my folder to help navigate students. So wherever they are, I give them a link to the next step up to go back to where they just came from. And then I also give them a link to the next area that they need to get to, whether it's inside that folder or a whole nother folder somewhere else if that's the end of that lesson. And that navigation seems to keep students on track. And that's how I deal with that, and that's how I teach instructors to help deal with that, is using those Blackboard course links for navigation.
Great, thanks Paige. And then do any of our other speakers want to chime in? Feel free to raise your hand so we know who to call on. Oh, sure, Brian, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Matt, that I tend to use the KISS method and usually set up a main content area and then just maybe one level of folders inside with not each chapter having its own folder, but maybe each module for a course, 4 or 5 chapters at a time, and segment those chapters into each folder. So maybe 1 to 2 levels deep, but I don't like to go much further than that.
Great, thanks Brian. And I believe Connie might have touched on the flow. Oh, sure, go for it, Connie.
Well, I wanted to add also that, and I believe that Kathy Seville might be intimating on this as well, that an important feature is providing some orientation to students right at the beginning of the course, perhaps in a begin here section, perhaps giving students a how this course works opportunity. And that can be very helpful if they get a sense of how you're going to run the course and then they would know that this is how the course is going to flow. And then once they've gone through one lesson, then they're going to know how the folders are going to be set up, and they're not going to be as confused as they go forward.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Dawn. This one is, can you put a link inside the text editor on a content page? If you would like to raise your hand, if you would like to take that question. Or if you need additional clarification from Dawn. Oh, Paige, feel free to answer.
Yeah, hi, Gwen. Now, the only way that I know to put a direct link inside the text editor itself is to get the hard-coded URL. But if you do that, then if you copy the course, that link will break. So I haven't seen that as a tool inside the content editor, but I do use the separate tool itself to get those links, to create those, and I just kind of have those at the top or bottom of the content area that the student is in so that they can see those links and how to get from one place to another. I have, now, where that's different is in the wikis, in Blackboard wikis. You can link from one wiki page to another within the content editor, so it does exist in the wiki area.
Great, thanks Paige, and I also know Misty updated that the links in the text editor are on Blackboard Learn's product roadmap. So it is something we're thinking about. Do any of our other speakers have additional thoughts on the text editor link question? And if not, please continue to write in your questions. We have additional about 12 minutes to keep an open forum, and there's no question too small. We're here for if you're a beginner to Blackboard Learn and you have questions about course design, or if you're more advanced. These are 5 experts on course design, so you can ask your more advanced questions, maybe just pain points you're having in your courses, and they'll be happy to provide feedback on what they do for their courses or how they teach others. So another question from Dawn. Do you find that when you cut, copy, and paste inside the text editor that it doesn't hold the text and sometimes it is different sizes? If any of our speakers would like to raise their hand, or if you've had that similar issue.
Hi, Dawn. This is Paige again. At KCTCS, we strongly recommend not copying and pasting anything, except maybe to copy and paste into a notepad and then copy from there and paste into Blackboard. That way it's not bringing over any of the back formatting, and then you can do your formatting inside Blackboard, and that does certainly help keep it more consistent throughout the site. So that's sort of what we do with copy and paste, is we suggest you don't do it, or do it into Notepad where it has no formatting at all, and then bring the non-formatted one into Blackboard and do your formatting directly into Blackboard.
Thanks, Paige. Brian, you're up.
Yeah, that's just kind of what I was going to say is recommend creating all your content in something you feel comfortable with, then either save it as HTML or save it as a PDF document to then kind of incorporate it into your course. But I just also wanted to make mention Kathy Seville. I noticed that she was talking about the Getting Started module, and she was at our institution previously, and that's what she did here. And it's a great way to get students who've never touched Blackboard to become familiar with the course. But it's funny, it has a reverse effect. By having a professional instructional designer design such a module, some of the faculty who may not know what all the tools were for and didn't maybe want to ask a question kind of get to take a look at the Getting Started module and say, oh yeah, maybe I can incorporate that into my course. So it has a twofold effect actually.
Great, and I know that Paige has written a comment that they have a Getting Started area on our courses as well, and it helps, so it's definitely something that we hear from our clients. See, a question from Troy. Any specific resources such as websites or books for new instructional design people such as himself? He says he was made instructional design coordinator on the basis that I'm a full-time professor and I've never broken Blackboard. So he likes the Gagne ideas, so much more like that would be appreciated. So any specific resources we can recommend for Troy and others on the call? If you would like to raise your hand, if you'd like to share ideas with Troy. Sure, go for it, Brian.
Troy, I've never taken an instructional design course, but been using Blackboard in its predecessors all the way back to 1997, and the best way that I can recommend to find out what's hot, what's great for course design is to just get on as many listservs as you can find, and you will find out that everyone that I've ever come across is willing to share. You can see in the comments today even people are willing to share their getting started modules, share tips, and that's what I've, as a computer programming professor, a lot of my students, a lot of the graduates and that kind of stuff, they don't want to share their final products and their work, but this is such a great community that everyone's willing to share, and I'd recommend just taking advantage of everybody here and kind of picking everybody's brain on lists and just see what's working at their institutions and maybe what's not working.
Thanks, Brian. Does anyone else want to share resources or ideas where Brian can get, or where Troy can get some resources? Okay, next question we have from Vicki. Do you find it easier for student navigation to design a course using a unit topic design or tool type design, such as assignments, assessments, discussions, etc.? Or do you suggest a duplication of both ways? She said they just moved from WebCT Vista, which was automatically set up this way. I'm sure, go for it, Brian, and then Paige.
I was going to say, Vicki, we actually use, or I use both because I've also been a WebCT Vista customer in the past and try to build into my content area, Chapter 1 assignment, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, etc. But what I also do is create a course schedule just in plain HTML. And I'm talking about for a purely online course in this situation, and then give them specific dates that they should be reading the content for Chapter 1 and what's coming up next, so that more or less they have a one-page printable handout that shows what is coming up next and what dates they should be working on each item.
And then Paige, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I also, similar to Brian, I use a content area page, but on that page I include links to any tools that they need to use. I use both blogs and wikis in my course. So if they have a blog that is due, I put the blog link there along with the instructions and a link to the how to create a blog post that's over on the ondemand.blackboard.com site, or the wiki one, whichever I happen to be using at the time. And then I also, in my course menu, I've got the coursework, which is where everything is, but under that I also have resources and tools, and I give direct links to the blogs, wikis, Blackboard Collaborate, calendar, grades, that kind of stuff. Kind of like Brian, I do it both ways. We also came from WebCT as well. So to make sure that I hit both sides of those, I put it in both places. Make sure they get it. Hopefully they'll read one of those places and end up in the right place.
Great. And Connie, you're up.
Oh, thank you. I think a lot of courses have evolved from different platforms and from different versions of each other. Like, you had a course and then you went from one semester to the next semester to the next semester. But we recently did some research with some students, and we have found that for online students, they really have a preference that courses be organized by week. They do their work by week. They consider their courses by week, and that is their preference. So they find that if instructors organize that content, no matter if you consider it by chapter, you consider it by topic, They like when everything that they need to do for a particular week is in a section organized by week, is really their preference. So it's difficult sometimes to get it all reorganized that way, but that's really how they have a preference for it. So that's what our research found. So I thought I would share that. It's not the way that many courses are organized, but it was rather eye-opening to find that that was actually the student preference for an online course, a totally online.
Great, thanks Connie. So we still have a few minutes. I see some of you are typing, so please keep your questions coming. Question from Nikki, are instructors responsible for making sure all content is accessible to the disabled online student? If not, who? How is the access testing done? And I think Nikki brings up a very important point. We get a lot of questions about accessibility. And I will let one of our speakers answer that. Maybe we'll have, if Paige or Brian want to talk about how it's done at their schools, and then maybe one of the internal Blackboarders more about accessibility here. So Brian, you're up.
What I was going to say, we have a committee on campus that reviews every one of our courses that are going to be offered as 100% electronic courses. And one of the requirements is that we've either worked with someone or we've made sure that all of our content is accessible. Now, of course, we may have 200 sections of courses totally online and probably 1,500 maybe using Blackboard as a whole, and not all of those undergo review. So it still is a very difficult process, especially when someone gets into an advanced class and they want to, like I said earlier, do all their PDFs maybe. Maybe it's a chemistry course and a lot of models, and it's really, really hard to ensure that all of that is done properly, especially without training for every single person here.
And then do any of our other speakers want to comment on accessibility? I will say we have some up. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Lauren. This is Paige again. We have several. The KCTCS is we have one system office, and then we have 70 different campuses encompassing 16 colleges. And ours are done differently by each area. They can do whatever they think. But at this point, mostly our instructors are taking care of that themselves, possibly working with the disability office on their campus. But that is something we have been discussing and have realized that we have that missing piece, because instructors think that the disability office should do it. The disability office says, we don't know how to do it for online, so it's your call. So we've discovered that we're missing a technology person kind of to bridge that gap. So that's what we're looking into now, is whose exact responsibility is it, and do we need a person to work with faculty to help get it done and done correctly? We're also piloting Kaltura right now, which is a media server that will link in with Blackboard, and they have some services as well for doing the automated captioning, either from a service or from a live captioning company. So we're looking into all of those as well.
Great, thanks Paige. And then do we have anyone else from the Blackboard side who wants to talk about accessibility? Oh, go ahead, Cheryl.
Hey Lauren, I just wanted to add that there's a lot of good material out there on universal design that lends itself nicely, of course, to designing. So for those of you that might be interested in looking further into designing for accessibility, universal design is definitely the newest and the best research that's out there currently based on that. I also wanted to just add to that one more, which would be that the multi-modality is also important when we think about design. So I know that Paige had referenced about the captioning, and we definitely want to keep that in mind, that on top of the ADA that we also think about those different types of learning styles. And so consequently, having those audio files or having the standalone text files for any type of media that is utilized, as well as those alt image captions, that it's very important to all learners. And just to that last end, if you use different font colors, just keep that cohesion and be cognizant that there's a lot of different ways that we design for all different learning styles.
And Paige, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was also going to include that if you use Blackboard Collaborate, they do have a captioning feature with that as well. And I have been playing with and been relatively successful with using Dragon Naturally Speaking to self-caption while I am doing a live session. And I was experimenting on that for a hearing disability student that I had, but what I found very intriguing was that students without a hearing disability also wanted to know where they could find that closed captioning so they could read along as they were listening. So you may want to look into something like that as well if you're using the Blackboard Collaborate and needing to get captioning in there.
Great, thanks Paige. And if you want to pop the name of the tool you were using, the third-party tool in the chat in case anyone else wants to investigate that. So we're at the hour mark. I have 2 more announcements before we conclude today. Thank you for all of your questions. They were great. If you have more, you can definitely reach out to us, and we will be having more office hours, so stay tuned for those. So one of the first things I wanted to touch on was our Exemplary course program, and we actually have one of our Exemplary course program winners here with us. So Paige's course won. The program began in 2000. And the goal was really to create a rubric and a guide for best practices for creating, designing, and engaging online courses. Can I get a green check or a red X if you've heard of the Blackboard Exemplary Course rubric? Okay, thank you. So I see some of you have and some of you have not. So I'll give you a quick overview. The rubric is broken down into 4 parts that clients created. The first was course design, second was collaboration and interaction, the third was assessment, and the fourth was learner support, which includes some of the accessibility topics we were just talking about. Now I wanted to bring up the Exemplary Course rubric. You can find it at blackboard.com/ECP. But because our program is going to kick off again December 1st. And it's also a great way to have yourself or a team of your colleagues and other faculty or an instructional design team to gain more experience in designing exemplary courses by, 1, reviewing other courses, and Kathy Seville noted that she's reviewed several times. To look, you can get a chance. People will submit their courses, so you can submit your course and go through the process. There's a submission form that you fill out. And then you can also sign up to be a course reviewer. So what that means is you are given the rubric and you also have your own application that you're filling out evaluating someone else's course. So it can give you a chance to see what your peers around the world are doing, how they're designing their courses, and you can go through and see what they're doing well in their course and what areas they still need for improvement. And it's also great feedback. If you submit your course, you will receive reviews back. So I just wanted to point that out. I also know clients have told us they will just use the rubric and kind of have an internal professional development process themselves and not participate in the program, but just create their own program at their school to make everyone aware. So I wanted to point that out there as one of the great course design resources that Blackboard has been working on and trying to get the word out for the past 10 years or so. And Kathy and Paige can both tell you more about the process. I also wanted to note that Connie and Cheryl are both in our Blackboard consulting department, and they are experts in course design, and there are options if you would like you or your school to have more information about having someone come to your school, provide more course design training, or if you wanted to participate in something online, or if you wanted to work with your school and the team to create a custom portfolio. So if they're on the call, they can stay on for a few minutes and answer more questions, and there's also information. You can email them at training@blackboard.com. Prices vary, and they can work with you to see what's best for your school in your program. So those are our 2 big announcements. Thank you everyone for joining. We are so thrilled with our first office hours. Let me know your thoughts. You can email us at community@blackboard.com. Let us know if you liked the office hours, if you have more questions. Just tell us how we're doing, as this was a suggestion by one of our clients, and we think it went well, so let us know the feedback as well. And thank you all for joining. The session has been recorded. We will send out a follow-up email, most likely tomorrow, with access to the recording for all of you to share with your colleagues. All right, have a great week.